Welcome and thank you for standing by. Today's call is being recorded. If you have any objections, you may disconnect at this time. All participants are in a listen-only mode until the question-and-answer session of today's conference. At that time, you may press star 1 on your phone to ask a question. I would now like to turn the call over to your host, Irene Iyer. You may begin.
Thank you. Hello, I am Irene Iyer of CDRH's Office of Communication and Education. Welcome to the FDA's 32nd in a series of virtual town hall meetings to help answer technical questions about the development and validation of tests for SARS-CoV-2 during the public health emergency. Today, Toby Lowe, Associate Director of the Office of In Vitro Diagnostics and Radiological Health in the Office of Product Evaluation and Quality here in CDRH, will provide a brief update. She is joined by Dr. Brittany Shook and Dr. Chris Ross. Following opening remarks, we will open the line for your questions related to today's discussion. Please remember that we are not able to respond to questions about specific submissions that might be under review. Now, I give you Toby.
Thanks, Irene. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us again. Tim is not able to join us this week since he had a conflict. So I've asked Chris and Brittany to join me to help with some of the more technical questions, since, as you all know, I'm a policy person. So a couple updates quickly before we get into questions. First, just want to point out as we head into the end of the year, the schedule for the town halls may shift. So keep an eye on your emails. Our team that handles the webinars will make sure to send out emails with updates on the dates for the town halls in case they're not every week. And then the other update that I have is that earlier this week, we updated the antigen template, the EUA template for antigen tests. And this update adds some recommendations regarding studies for screening of asymptomatic individuals and for multi-analyte antigen tests. So that template replaced the older one that was on our website and is available for test developers to use as you prepare your EUA requests. And with that, we can turn it over to questions.
Thank you. We will now begin our question and answer session. If you would like to ask a question over the phone lines, please press star 1 from your phone, unmute your line, and speak your name clearly when prompted. Your name is required to introduce your question. If you would like to withdraw your question, press star 2. Again, to ask a question over the phone lines, please press star then 1. One moment as we wait for our first question. Our first question comes from Shannon Clark. Your line is open.
Hi, this is Shannon Clark. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. I'm with UserWise, a human factors consultancy specializing in human usability testing. My question's a little long, but it has a lot of kind of history here. I first asked this question about a month and a half ago and got the answer that if we're running a study with an antigen test, we do not need to include Spanish speakers if we do not include instructions for use in Spanish. A little more information about that. Translation of instructions for use into Spanish and inclusion of Spanish speakers delays timelines by at least 1 month for development and adds between 30K and 50K in cost of development. Only 2% of the US population primarily speaks Spanish, and it's basically impossible to find participants for usability testing that only speak Spanish, such that they would definitely rely on those Spanish instructions when interacting with the product. So some weeks ago, the FDA noted that, some weeks ago I asked this question, and Timothy Stenzel noted that you actually do not need to include Spanish speakers if you don't have Spanish instructions. But then on October 7th, Dr. Stenzel said something that was a little alarming to me about that this isn't true any longer. So do you have an update on that, or is it still true that we are not required to include Spanish speakers, as the statement in the template for non-laboratory antigen test use says the word should, which is quote unquote optional?
So all of our templates are recommendations. So, to that point, they are our current thinking and our recommendations. They are not binding requirements. So specifically for the non-laboratory, the over-the-counter type consumer tests, we do have a recommendation to include Spanish-speaking individuals in the testing. I do not believe that we have that recommendation currently in the antigen template. And, you know, as I said, for all of these are our recommendations. So if you have different approaches or you want to propose not including that, that's something that you can submit with your EUA request.
Okay, thank you. And to clarify, last time I checked, in a non-laboratory antigen template, it did clearly say should include Spanish speakers. Did you update that in the last 2 weeks?
Sorry, no. The non-laboratory template is for both molecular and antigen. I was referring to the more general antigen template that is for laboratory based tests.
Oh yes, of course, for professional.
So sorry, I was thinking about the wrong template there. The non-laboratory based template does recommend usability, including Spanish speakers. If you are proposing not to do that, that's something that you can include in your EUA request, and we'll consider that.
Excellent. And I've been doing this testing for 10 years. FDA's never required Spanish speakers in testing unless it's an integrated part of the user interface. So yeah, thanks for clarifying that.
Sure.
Our next question comes from Wendy Strongen. Your line is now open.
We're developing a home use antigen test, and we want to have an opt-in surveillance feature. Is there anyone at FDA or at CDC that we can work with in order to be able to provide that information to the government?
You're referring to reporting the results to the government?
Reporting the results, right? I know that it's not required, but I know that FDA would like to have those results reported even from a home test if there's a way to do that.
Yes, so we do have the recommendation in the template for non-laboratory tests to include a mechanism for reporting. If you have specific questions about how exactly to implement that, we do have a team that works a little bit more closely on the reporting issues. So the best approach would be to send us an email to the EUA templates email address that should be on the slides, and we'll be able to direct your question to the right group.
Great, thank you very much.
Sure.
Our next question comes from Susanna Estes. Your line is open.
Hello, this is Savannah Estes, also from UserWise. My question is regarding home use usability testing. The FDA recommended us to evaluate the labeling and instructions for a test kit using a multiple choice questionnaire, but historically our human factors community has found that multiple choice questions are inappropriate for assessing comprehension of labeling. And so we always ask these questions directly to participants and rarely have them fill out forms themselves. Has the FDA human factors team confirmed that multiple choice questions for home use human factors testing is the most effective way to assess labeling IFUs?
I'm not going to be able to answer the question directly of what the human factors team has assessed, unfortunately. But I can say that if you have an alternate approach that you'd like to use, that's definitely something that we can consider, and we just ask you to send that in for our consideration.
Okay, and just to clarify, this was sent to us in an email, not necessarily outlined in a template. So that's why we were trying to follow up here. So you're suggesting that we just go ahead and submit with our plan and then wait to hear back, or am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, if you can send in the question of the approach that you're looking to take, we can discuss that with the team that works primarily on the home test issues and get back to you on that.
Okay, and should those questions be directed to the template's email address?
Yes, that's a great first spot to start, and we can direct it from there.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Our next question comes from Gustavo Higuere. Your line is open.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Gustavo Higuere, and my question is in reference to using a real-time PCR equipment to do the reference panel validation. We're trying to help a Chinese company called Sansure Biotech comply with the required reference panel. As such, we have a question regarding the devices that may be used to perform the test. We have at our disposal an ABI 7500 Fast DX real-time PCR instrument and a SLAN 96P real-time PCR system. However, the IFU in the EUA mentions an ABI 7500 real-time PCR system. Is it possible to perform the reference panels using the ABI 7500 Fast DX real-time PCR system or the SLAN 96 real-time PCR system, as we do not have access to the one mentioned in the IFU?
So if you're referring to performing the reference panel as a condition of the authorization, which is typically what the how the reference panel is currently being used, then the performance of the reference panel does need to be in line with the instructions for use of the authorized test, so that it is reflective of the test that was authorized.
Oh, okay. They have introduced an amendment, including the equipment that I have mentioned, but the amendment has not been reviewed. I guess maybe pending the reference panel results?
So I'm not able to answer any questions about a specific test. Generally, we do expect the reference panel to be performed using the authorized test. If there's any specific questions about any, an amendment or any alterations there, those should go directly to the review team.
Okay, then we'll find an equipment as mentioned in the IFU. And with regards to the software, does the software have to be the exact same software, or could it be a more updated software on the equipment?
So it should be the test as authorized.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks a lot. That answers my question.
Great.
Our next question comes from Arvita Tripathi. Your line is open.
Hi there. Thanks so much for taking the question. I'm wondering about changes to EUAs. Can you maybe expand a little bit about the thought process and policy on changes? Like, should we be following the 510K change notification guidance, and how you'd like to see that kind of work out?
This is for a test that you have that is already authorized?
Our test is not yet authorized. We're hoping for that soon. However, due to supply shortages, we're anticipating there might be a need to, say, have alternative swabs or other components of the product get updated. And if so, we just want to be able to plan for what additional testing, and if there is any additional regulatory review, we want to be able to plan that into our timelines.
Sure. So the best bet is always to include as much flexibility as you can in your authorization or in your test that you're submitting for authorization, so that, if possible, we can authorize it with a variety of components. If you want to add additional components later on, that's something that you would submit in a supplemental EUA request. When you do get authorized, your letter of authorization will include conditions of authorization that spell out what types of changes should come in for a supplemental EUA request in order to update the authorization. And a lot of the tests that are already authorized, have those they all have those conditions. So you can see those on our website if you wanted to take a look at how those conditions are drafted. And I can also note that we do have some information on our FAQ page about alternate testing supplies. So, for example, we talk about the different types of swab types that can be used. Most tests now that are being authorized for use with all of those, NP swabs, OP, mid-turbinate, and anterior nares. So we do talk about that. If you wanted to add a new specimen type altogether, like adding saliva, that would be something that you would come back in with. These questions, or my responses rather, are all presuming that you're talking about a distributed test kit. So those are all the different considerations that you would want to look at, is sort of, what you want to be able to include in your original instructions for use and what you might want to add later.
All right. Thank you very much. It's helpful.
Sure.
Our next question comes from Margot Emerate. Your line is open.
Hi. Thanks very much for all the useful information you've provided us. I just had a question regarding a term that I've heard used different ways and wanted to get some clarification from you, the term screening. Can you clarify what you mean by the term screening?
Sure. So when we refer to screening, and we do have information on this up on our website on the FAQ page, we have a question that discusses the difference between surveillance, screening, and diagnostic testing. So when we talk about screening, we're talking about testing primarily asymptomatic individuals to look for occurrence at the individual level. So this would be, a broad testing of asymptomatic individuals who do not have any known exposure, with the intent of identifying individuals who were infected but don't have any symptoms, either because they have not yet developed them or because we know that with this disease there are a number of individuals who are infected but do not present with any symptoms.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. That's the way I understood it, but I've heard it used different ways, so I wanted to make sure I got a clarification from you. Thank you very much.
Great, no problem.
Our next question comes from Jeff Dre. Your line is open.
Hi, thanks very much. We are planning to pass in a pre-EUA submission for an application for a home use configuration of POC virus sensing platform. We're relatively new to this area, and question is, if we are going to seek guidance or advice from the FDA, is it worthwhile submitting a partially populated template so that we can make a connection and get that kind of heads-up guidance? I mean, Dr. Stenzel has been pretty encouraging in previous calls with regards to at-home submissions. So we want to see if this is a good idea.
Yes, absolutely. As much as you can complete the template and include in your partially completed template where you have specific questions, that's the easiest way for our team to take a look at what you have and provide the most appropriate feedback. So as much detail as you can put in there, and then any places where you want to specify, for example, if you're not sure how to do your clinical study and you include maybe your draft protocol and ask specific questions that you have, then when your pre-EUA gets assigned to a reviewer, they know where to focus their attention.
Outstanding. Thanks very much.
Sure.
Our next question comes from Glenn Goodman. Your line is open.
Hi, and thank you. My question is, once a test has been approved and authorized and the requirements change, what is the responsibility of the test provider to change protocol, et cetera, to conform with the new requirements?
So by new requirements, are you referring to when we update a template or something else?
That's what I'm referring to, yeah.
Okay, so if there's a test that is already authorized, if we update the template, the developer of that already authorized test, so the owner of that EUA, does not need to do anything. If there are additional steps that need to be taken, we will reach out directly to the EUA holder.
Very good. Thank you.
Sure.
Our next question comes from Sharir Kosik. Your line is open.
Hi, this is Shri Kaushik. Toby, Brittany, and Chris, thank you very much for taking this call. I do have a very basic question. Dr. Stenzel 2 weeks ago mentioned that there was a backlog of NCI testing for the serology tests and that backlog was getting cleared. Having submitted an EUA and also waiting for authorization or saying no for the past 5 months, it would be good to understand if there's any plans from you guys to sort of just say, since we can't get the NCI testing done in time, we'll just deal with the EUA directly and move on. The reason I'm asking is because we've been trying to our reviewers have been extremely good at responding, but since this is a policy question, I just wanted to see if you have any updates on the NCI testing and how it's delayed the EUA authorization for a lot of us.
Thanks for that question. So I'll try to answer a little bit, and then I'll see if Brittany wants to add anything there. So we do prioritize the tests that are being tested at NCI based on a number of factors, including the data that we are already aware of before they perform that testing. And we do find that we get very useful information from the NCI testing. So right now we are tending to rely on that. But I'll turn it over to Brittany to see if she wants to add anything there about the backlog or prioritization.
Sure, yeah. Obviously, we are reviewing all EUA requests as quickly as we can. And as Toby mentioned, and Tim has mentioned previously, we are prioritizing reviews based on several factors, including our prioritization of testing at NCI, and priority is given to testing at NCI for complete submissions, where we have complete data in the EUA request and where the performance is adequate based on the data submitted in the EUA request. And we are continuing through that process. And there is a frequently asked question on our website regarding how we're incorporating the results from the NCI evaluation into our decision-making for EUA requests. It highlights there some of the concerns we've had, in particular for lateral flow devices. And for that reason, we generally have the NCI evaluation prior to any authorization, particularly for lateral flow devices and for other technologies as well, like those Eliza, luminescent immunoassays, et cetera.
Thanks, Brittany.
Thank you.
To emphasize one of the points that Brittany made, we do prioritize for NCI testing those submissions that have complete EUA requests and that look good prior to the NCI testing. So it's very unlikely that there would be a test that we would be otherwise ready to authorize that we're not prioritizing for NCI testing.
Well, I mean, what I would like to understand is, just as a follow-up, is that how would we know? Because we know that we're on the queue and been in the queue since end of May. And as I said, our reviewer has been fantastic. I have nothing but good things to say about her. But the question still is, we don't have an idea of whether and I've had multiple questions from the reviewer, which I've addressed as quickly as possible. What I don't have an idea of is whether or not we made the priority list and whether or not we can expect a result anytime soon. So that's, I mean, we do get questions from the sponsors because they're all international sponsors and they're, wanting to sell their diagnostic in the United States. But the problem is that even after notification, nobody wants to buy the kits unless you have a full authorization. So we understand how busy you guys are, and we really, really appreciate all the time that everybody is putting into it. But and while I've heard about the priority list, I don't know how I'd know what my list is. Am I medium priority or low priority? Because it was a full submission, whatever we submitted. So that's what I'm asking. And if there's a policy of saying.
Yeah, if you're continuing to interact with the lead reviewer on your submission, that means that there are questions about the information that have been provided, and so those might be clarifying questions to make sure they understand what's in the submission to assure that it is complete and has all the information that we would need. And then there may also be subsequent emails with deficiencies, with things that are not adequate in that particular submission. So if you're having those continued interactions with the lead reviewer, that means that there's still outstanding questions that have not been resolved, and we would not be prioritizing testing until those issues and those questions have been resolved. So that's one way to know sort of where you are in terms of how likely it is that testing would be imminent.
Okay. I want to thank you again. I'm going to ask my lead reviewer what she thinks, but I want to thank all of you for the time that you've put in during these town halls and all the help that you're providing us. I greatly appreciate it, and I'm pretty sure the rest of the community greatly appreciates your help. Thank you.
Thank you. That's always nice to hear.
Our next question comes from Lubna Saeed. Your line is now open.
Hi, thanks very much, everybody. Again, just reiterating the previous caller, we do really appreciate these calls. And I know you're mentioning that there may be a change in schedule. Hopefully we're not eliminating the calls in any way. But my question is related to home diagnostic molecular tests, in particular related to the package insert. Traditionally, for home testing, a paper package insert is required. However, now with mobile medical applications and electronic instructions for use, because it's a lay user, traditionally it's been paper package insert. But now that one of the requirements for utilizing these products is the use of a mobile application in order to process the sample, and we have the associated usability testing. I'm wondering if there's a possibility to include the quick reference guide or quick reference information in paper format with a reference to how you can get paper if necessary, but eliminate that paper from the packaging of the product that's going out so that it's not required to have the full package insert shipped with the product in paper format, only the QRG or QRS.
So I think that, that would depend a little bit on what information you intend to have on the quick reference guide, and whether the information on that would satisfy the device labeling requirements. So that's something that we may need to look at more specifically for your situation. And so if that's something that you can email into to our email box, we can take a closer look at that.
Okay, that's great that could be a potential pathway. It will help to eliminate costs, to reduce costs to the users ultimately, if it's a viable pathway.
I think, that's, it's another consideration would be the population that you're intending to use this. So if you were to eliminate, paper instructions and only have this be app-based, then that would limit the use of the testing to individuals who have an appropriate device, an appropriate smartphone or whatever device it is that
right.
Your app would run on.
And that's a requirement already, anyways, right, to use the product. So that's why I'm saying because that is a requirement to use the product, is to have an app.
For your device.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so it would be great to understand which elements are necessary to go in, and you know, if this could then carry forward for 510K as well. So perhaps I will send you a question in the EUA templates email, and maybe that could be answered that way. Does that make sense?
Sure, and I think, you know, the device labeling regs, especially the IVD specific labeling regs, are a good place to start. So we would want to make sure that you know, that all of those labeling requirements are covered.
Yeah, I mean, we are covering 809.10 in the paper insert, and you know, in terms of the IVD regulations in general, for lab products, you know, those are not lay user. For professional user purposes, paper package insert is not required. Electronic package insert is acceptable. What I'm specifically asking for is for home users or non-lab users, layperson kind of environment. That's the key distinction. Otherwise, the elements are there.
Okay, sure. So if you can send that in, that's something that we can take a closer look at your proposal.
Okay, great. Thanks so much.
Sure.
Our next question comes from Franco Calderon. Your line is now open.
Hi, good morning, and thanks for taking the time to answer our call. So let's assume that I get EUA for my antigen test, and then later on I want to come add influenza A and influenza B capability to that antigen test that already has EUA. Can I just amend and do that, or does that process have to be a completely new one, a new EUA?
I believe, so it depends a little bit on what the change is to the test. So that's something that we could consider depending on how you'd be changing your test. But it would also depend on whether you're whether you would be marketing two versions of the test, or whether you would be switching completely to the new test, because we would, you know, if you're intending to market two versions, we would want those to be two separate authorizations.
I see. Got it. Okay, that answers my question. Thank you.
Sure.
Our next question comes from Alexander Voltan. Your line is open.
Hello.
Alex.
Hi. Kind of a somewhat unusual question. Over the last several months, there was at least one pilot study came out indicating success of training dogs to detect COVID-19. What would be compliance requirements for deploying trained dogs to identify out potentially infected individuals for future screening in public settings like airports or malls, or private settings like workplaces? Would a trained dog be considered a test as far as FDA is concerned?
That's something that we could answer through the mailbox if you can send your question in.
Right. Great. Thank you.
Our next question comes from Tom Sayer. Your line is open.
Yes, thank you so much for the opportunity. This is regarding sensitivity for the EUA for the antigen test. In Section 7, your clinical evaluations, you say that approximately 10 to 20% of the clinical specimens should be low positive RT-PCR CT counts of greater than 30. In light of a lot of research that indicates that a person is most likely not contagious at higher CT levels, can you tell us how you would evaluate results of an antigen test that perhaps did not reflect positives at the higher CT values, if it was being used as a screening test?
Chris, is this something that you're able to address?
Partially, I suppose. I think what you're maybe referring to is maybe a low sensitivity antigen test. Is that correct?
Well, right, an antigen test that would be highly sensitive at the lower CT values, but might not result in a positive at CT values greater than 30 because of the low viral load at that level.
Right. So analytically, it's a low sensitivity test compared to PCR. So I think there are some recommendations in the new template for tests which have a lower sensitivity, and perhaps a serial testing strategy could be considered. And that's something that I don't think we have comments we could offer to you right now, but that's a strategy that you could propose, as long as you're kind of hitting that 70% kind of PPA mark with respect to a high sensitivity RT-PCR test.
Okay, great, thank you. I do see that strategy for serial testing. Okay, that answers my question. Thank you.
Our next question comes from Dana Hummel. Your line is open.
Thank you for taking my call. My question is regarding the earlier comment about the priority for NCI testing. I believe you said that more complete EUA submissions are a higher priority. And we sent our test to the NCI back in July, and we have not submitted our EUA because we need the NCI results just to complete the clinical validation testing recommended by the FDA. All the other performance data looks good, and all of our other data is ready. So are you recommending that we submit our partially completed EUA application so that you can see all the other data and information we have prepared to help move us up in the queue at the NCI? Otherwise, I just wonder if our test is viewed as a lower priority since you do not have any of our EUA information.
Brittany, do you want to take this one?
Sure, yes. We would encourage you to go ahead and submit the information that you do have documenting in the clinical agreement study section that you have sent your test to NCI, and that your intention is to leverage that data to support the clinical agreement data.
Okay, and as a follow-up, I thought once we submit our pre-EUA that we technically only have either 10 or 15 days to submit the complete EUA, which should include the clinical validation data. However, if we don't receive the NCI results within that time frame, then we can't submit the complete EUA. So I just wonder if you have any comments on how to handle that.
So I think what you're referring to is actually notification. So that's different from the pre-EUA. Notification is only appropriate if you have completed validation of your test. So if you're waiting for data from NCI, then you would not have completed your validation yet. So notification is for tests that have fully completed their validation and notify us that they intend to begin offering their test prior to EUA authorization. And then under that policy that's in our testing policy guidance, then we do expect to see a full EUA request submission within 10 business days. But it doesn't sound like that would be applicable to your situation. So you could submit your either pre-EUA or EUA request, depending on whether you have additional questions. If you don't have any additional questions and you just are waiting on that data, you could submit an EUA request, as Brittany indicated.
Okay, and then once we do have the NCI results, we would do the notification.
Yes, you could do notification once you have the NCI results, provided that that all of your other validation is complete. Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Our next question comes from Jackie Chen. Your line is now open.
Hello. I also have a question about the NCI results for Brittany. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hello? Oh, okay, great,
yes.
Perfect. Thank you. And then this is a follow-up question. on the previous caller, I think Brittany mentioned that NCI results can also be expanded to ELISA or the chemiluminescence test. Is it true? Because I was under the impression that NCI testing only tests the lateral flow test, the lateral flow-based serology test.
Yeah, NCI does have the capability to evaluate manual ELISA and chemiluminescent immunoassays, things that would typically require like a plate reader and things like that. Specialized instruments that are specific to a particular manufacturer, NCI may not have access to those. But we may ask that certain ELISAs and chemiluminescent immunoassays that are manual and can be evaluated by NCI to be evaluated by the NCI.
Oh, okay. That's very helpful. So if we have a specialized chemiluminescent reader, then NCI will not be able to evaluate it. And then, are there ways we can get the instrument evaluated outside of the NCI program?
So it also does depend what type of instrumentation. So NCI has been able to evaluate certain tests that have small readers that have been able to be shipped to the NCI. So it really does depend. If you have a question about whether or not your particular device would be amenable to evaluation at NCI, you can email the OIR policy mailbox and we can help figure out if that's possible.
Oh, this is great. Thank you so much. Thank you. Very helpful. Thanks.
As a reminder, to ask a question over the phone lines, please press star then 1 and clearly record your name. Our next question comes from Sarah Saw. Your line is open.
Hi, I just want to thank you again for holding these calls weekly. I have a follow-up question. Someone asked earlier about changes to already authorized devices. And the conditions of use do not clearly address some of the smaller changes that may happen. So for example, if changes were made to buffer components of an authorized product, which if we were in the 510K paradigm could be documented using internal documentation, can that same pathway be applied instead of submitting an EUA amendment?
So I'm going to turn this over to Chris in a moment, but I think some of this depends on how the components of your test are specified in your authorization. So, buffers are something that might need to be looked at specifically by the team to take a look at that. But if you're, for example, if your test was authorized for use with a specific, a specific manufactured swab, and you wanted to switch to a different one, the fact that it was named in your authorization would mean that, technically you should get that change authorized. If, on the other hand, your EUA was authorized for use with, sort of more broadly with nasal swabs, then that would be something that you would not need to come in for that change. So it depends, and that was sort of a almost a silly example, but you can sort of use that to understand how that might apply to other components.
Right.
If you're looking at extraction kits, for example, it's going to be your test is generally authorized with specific extraction kits, and to add new ones, we would expect you to come back in.
Right. So if we're using like extraction kits as an example, it would be like, maybe it's even the same extraction kit, air quote, but there's been a small change to a buffer in that extraction kit. But the mechanism by which it works, none of that has changed. And if it were the 510K pathway, this would clearly be an internal documentation change.
Sure. So that might be a specific enough question that we would want to get into the details, but I'll see if Chris wants to weigh in at all first.
Yeah, thank you. I would just like to echo Toby's point. It's somewhat governed by the extent to which your labeling specifies those reagents. And I know we've seen some small changes to extraction buffers, perhaps removing certain components due to shortages. And I think that really needs to be taken a look at by a subject matter expert rather than just kind of providing a blanket policy, because certainly small changes in pH or what the composition of a buffer is versus taking away carrier RNA, for instance. I mean, those are two very different changes that may need to have considerations by someone who's on the review team.
So I think since you seem to have a very specific change in mind, the best bet would be to send that into the either to the EUA mailbox or to the review team if you have a lead reviewer that you're working with, and we'll be able to take a look at that more closely.
All right, thank you so much for your time.
Sure.
Our next question comes from AJ Data. Your line is open.
Oh, hi. Thank you for taking my call. Quick question. We're developing a neutralizing antibody serology test detecting specifically the proportion of antibodies that are neutralizing. Is there a template imminent for those kinds of test development, or should we just submit to the pre-EUA email for guidance?
I believe Tim has mentioned on previous calls that that there is, excuse me, a template in the works for neutralizing antibody. I'm not able to give sort of an estimate of when that might be out, but that is something, we are looking to provide more guidance in that direction. In the meantime, if you are ready to move forward with your test, you are always welcome to submit your EUA request or a pre-EUA if you have questions that are still unanswered.
Thank you. Thank you.
Our next question comes from Kendall Craddock. Your line is open.
Yes, thank you for taking my question. My question is in regards to an approved EUA test. Can a clinical lab perform a validation to modify an EUA? And I'm thinking specifically about stability and storage requirements of the specimen. And if so, how does that affect the classification of the test? And what kind of validation requirements come into play in that scenario? Is that considered an LDT, or do we need a resubmission, or how do we handle that?
Sure. So we do have some information in our policy guidance about modifications to an EUA authorized test that can be made by a clinical laboratory. So that would be a good first place to look. But yes, a clinical laboratory can make those changes. It would make the test an unauthorized test. So if the test is being performed outside of the authorized instructions for use, or using different components, whatever the modifications are, that would be outside of the authorization.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess where I'm unclear is how it's classified afterwards, and maybe if you've already spelled that out in some other document, I can find that, I guess. But it's with some of the changes recently. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Sure. I'm not quite sure what you mean by classified. None of these tests are classified at the moment, but they are. It would be considered a test that is being offered, as an unauthorized test. And we have indicated in the guidance document that we would not expect to see EUAs for those modifications to an authorized test.
Okay. Thank you.
I'm showing no additional questions in the queue at this time. I would now like to turn the call back over to your host, Irene.
Thank you. This is Irene here. We appreciate your participation and thoughtful questions. Today's presentation and transcripts will be made available on the CDRH Learn webpage at